live, and so we've got a nice group of industrial and systems engineers from around the world, or something akin to that. So welcome to all of you. Good day, and thank you for joining this IISE webinar. That's one of a series of webinars, over 90 now, that we've done over the last 3 years. Jim has been a regular with us. He's has been a great contributor to IISE. In fact, I was going to ask you before we get started, Jim. I referred to you as an IISE for life, and I don't know whether people understand what that means. But why have you chosen to commit so much of your life's energy to our profession and our professional society? I'm curious. You're going to talk about that more on the 4th of October, but just a quick answer to that.
Because I love what IISE does, and it's critical to the success of our companies and our country and our culture. So this is the most fun I can have, is being an active IISE past president and a proud recipient of multiple awards. And it's just been my pleasure to deal with like-thinking people and watching the profession grow and evolve. I mean, this is fun. If I like golf as much as I do doing industrial and systems engineering, you'd call me a golf bum. But I just happen to like IISE and working with industrial and systems engineers as a part of my life. It's what I do.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. So just a couple of, we've got a number of sponsors and partners that we work with to pull off this series of webinars. The Council on Industrial and Systems Engineers, which is an professional affinity group in IISE. And then, of course, Tompkins Ventures and the Proye Group are industry partners. A couple of housekeeping things here. You can read down through this list. Some of you like to get the certificates. Those will be mailed out to you from IISE within 5 days. We'll make sure that you have access to the webinar, to blogs, to the presentation, and so forth. So I'll talk more about that at the end of the session in terms of pointing you in the direction of how to do that. Without further ado, Jim, I want to pass the baton to you, and I'm going to go up here real quick and turn over. But you can get started if you want while I'm converting mouse control to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Scott, and thank you for all the work you do for IISE, in particular for the last several years with these webinars. It's a great service to the profession and to the Institute. I'm excited today to be able to present to you my latest book. And boy, this latest book, Insightful Leadership, has been a great learning process for me, because the world of publications have changed so much over when I used to do my other books that I've written. And so it's an exciting time. And many of you recognize my co-author on the Insightful Leadership book. My co-author is Michael Hughes. And Michael is a grad of NC State. And then he went into the newspaper world for about 18 years. He came out of that and went to work for an organization called AIIE that became IIE, that became IISE. And so Michael Hughes worked as the editor of the IE magazine, and then he worked in both marketing and sales for the Institute. And Michael is now the co-author of this book, as well as he is a portion of our team at Tompkins Ventures. So it's great to work with Michael on this book. How do I index the slides, Scott?
Use your mouse should work. I pass control to you, Jim.
Okay. And where do I put the mouse to make it work?
I moved it for you, but you should be able to do it.
Okay. It's not moving.
Okay.
Jamie, where do I put my mouse, or do we just let Scott do it?
I'm thinking you're going to need to let Scott do it, because I'm thinking you're looking at your screen and not his.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted these points one at a time, Scott, but let's leave it where it is for now on this slide.
Ahead.
But
yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to do is give a little background as to how we got here today. Why did I write this book called Insightful Leadership? What is going on, and where did this begin? Well, it actually began in October of 2016 when I did a YouTube video called Supply Chain Revolution: Responding to the Digital Disruption. And what I was focused on was in supply chain, what is the impact of digital disruption? And what I became really clear in is that artificial intelligence and machine learning was becoming cheaper than what I call natural intelligence. So AI became cheaper than NI, and it was become stronger and stronger in its capability. And so I saw that the digital disruption was going to have a major impact on what we were doing in supply chain. Next point. Scott, could I index? I'll say next point. Okay. So then in August of 2018, 2 years later, what I did is I started looking at what was going on with disruption in a broader context. And in a broader context, what I saw was a record number of forest fires, a record number of hurricanes, a record number of bankruptcies, and the world was starting to go crazy. And I went back and looked at what I called massive disruptions globally, and the number of disruptions and the magnitude of those disruptions were growing and growing and growing. And so that gave me concern as to how we're going to create competitive advantage if these innovations and disruptions continued. And so then in June of 2019, I said we need to have an understanding of the science of disruption. And I went back and looked at a term that was invented in 1989 called VUCA, where VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And VUCA became my battle cry. And so in June of 2019, I did a video reintroducing the term VUCA and saying, how do we really create competitive advantage in these difficult times? And as I did that, what I saw was that, wow, there's a trend occurring. And I believe there's going to be more and more and more disruption as we go forward. Well, watch what you say, big guy. Because what happened then in March of 2020, I was actually at a conference in Atlanta, and I came home from the conference first week in March, and my wife said, we're going into lockdown. And I said, oh, cool. Is that a new restaurant in town? I had no idea what going into lockdown meant. I thought we were going to dinner someplace. And no, what she was telling me is this thing, COVID-19, which I had heard about. And I knew it was something in China and people were getting sick and people were dying and it was a terrible thing. But what happened is this COVID thing became the mother of all disruptions. I mean, it was just mammoth. And I had people writing me and say, Jim, in your June video, you said we're going to have more and more disruptions of greater impact. Did you predict COVID? Well, no, I didn't predict COVID. I didn't know what the word COVID meant. I didn't know what a pandemic meant. I had no idea about anything about this occurring. But what occurred was massive. And we all went to lockdown and it started to have major impacts on what we're doing. In May, Scott called me and he says, let's stay, Dave Poirier, you and I, and Jim Dobson, let's put together a program that talks about how to respond to COVID. So in May in 2020, we did an IISE webinar series on how do we respond to COVID. That then led to a July of 2021 activity where I was understanding, oh my goodness, disruptions are not bad. Disruptions are opportunities. And so what we have is we have a continual perpetual disruptions, but these perpetual disruptions beget continuous perpetual opportunities. What an awesome time to be an industrial and systems engineer where we have perpetual opportunities to do our thing. In August of 2022, then the book came out. The book came out 1 month and 2 days ago, and the book has kind of exploded onto the marketplace. Amazon presented us with 3 awards in the first week of the book's production, and that was a #1 new release in business systems, #1 new release in strategic and business planning, and #1 new release in systems and planning. And so I thought, oh my goodness, this thing has really caught on. And why has it caught on? It's because people are saying, I don't know how to manage my company. I don't know how to make decisions. The level of uncertainty and volatility that exists today is beyond anything we've seen historically. And so we need a new way to make things happen. We need a new way to manage. We need a new way to lead. we need a new way of doing industrial and systems engineering. And so that's what leads us to today's seminar. And that's the background of how we have got here. So what is the foundation of the book is kind of insightful leadership of my thought process. It comes from 3 books. In 2007, we read Black Swan. In 2000, 7 years earlier, we read The Tipping Points. And 15 years before that, we read the book Discovering the Future of Paradigms. And if we look at the shift of paradigms, that was actually the first book written in 1985, but it's actually the 3rd book in my thought process. I read The Business of Paradigm by Joel Barker in 1985. I watched his videos and I thought, wow, this guy is really cool. He taught us there's 2 types of changes. There's change that's the continuous improvement. And then there's the change like, oh my goodness, hang on to your hat. We have a shift in the way we think about things. We have a paradigm shift. And so that was really, really, really insightful for me, because I now understood, when is it just our normal change and when is it when we have to totally reinvent? And so that was my first thought. My second thought then was in year 2000, when I understood what was going on with respect to tipping points, where tipping points, no, let's go back. The tipping points were saying, oh my goodness, there's a point where little things happen, little things happen, little thing happen, and then all of a sudden, bango, it crosses a threshold, and then we create a whole new wildfire. And so tipping points, the concept basically came from a plague, which is interesting. But the plague, it's what it says is, some people get sick and then all of a sudden a critical mass, and then boom, it takes off like the hockey stick. So that's what the tipping point is about. And then the most recent book, 2007 on Black Swan, is talking about unexpected events and how unpredictable, massive impact, things that are, we try to rationalize after the fact, are taking place. Now, what I did then is I took these books in the opposite order of the time I read them, and I started to understand disruptions, because disruptions are black swans. There are things that happen that we didn't expect to happen. That's why we're saying they're uncertain and we got volatility. But that uncertainty and volatility then leads to, some of the time, a tipping point, and some of the time, those tipping points beget paradigm shifts. And so although these 3 books were done by 3 different people at 3 different times, in fact, there is a pattern. It goes black swan, tipping point, paradigm shifts. And so why now for insightful leadership? Why is this the right time to talk about this topic? Well, the fact of the matter is what we had is a black swan got together with VUCA, and now what we're dealing with a reality that disruption is the new normal. This is huge. This changes our profession, because what we see is that when you some disruptions just become disruptions, some disruptions become tipping points, some go all the way and become a paradigm shift. And when they go all the way to being a paradigm shift, that is the new normal. There's people saying to me, Jim, why don't we go back to the old normal? I would love to go back to the old normal, but it's not going to happen. Old normal is gone. New normal is disruption. And so the future is not going to be like the past. We used to do planning is we took the past, we made the projections of what's going to be different. That's no longer true. The future has nothing to do with the past. The past is just history. And what we need to do is look at what's going to happen next and what's the impact on that on the future. And so the past is not relevant with respect to what's going to occur going forward. It's going to be the paradigm shifts that are going to require us to have a new philosophy. So the next point says paradigm shift requires a new leadership philosophy. It requires a new management philosophy. It requires a new approach to industrial and systems engineering. And so what we see is the disruptions of the last few years have changed the way we work. They changed the way we shop. They changed the way we raise our families. It changed the way we learn. It's changed the way we entertain. It changes the way we worship. It changes how we live. Every aspect of our life is different today than it was just 3 years ago. And so I use then in the book, the subtitle of the book says, Surfing the Waves to Organizational Excellence. And so surfing is a cool analogy to think about. Now but my wife and I have a house on the ocean, okay, at the beach. Scott has a house on a lake. Scott doesn't see perpetual waves. He only sees waves when boats go around. But at 3 in the morning, there's no waves on Scott's lake. On my ocean, the waves never stop. The waves are perpetual, and the waves continue to go 24/7. And so if I am going to look at being a surfer, what's the first thing I got to do? I got to get my board and I got to get in the water. Okay, so the first thing you do is you get in the water. Now, once you're in the water, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit on my surfboard looking in the direction towards shore, because my objective is to have a great ride, to harness the power of the waves to get to shore. And so I'm looking at the shore, I'm facing the shore, but now I'm looking over my shoulder. And I'm looking, oh, that next wave, no, that's not a good one. It's not breaking well. The wave after that, no. I'm using my experience to check out the waves. And look, if you look 3 waves back, you see how that wave is breaking? And you see what the terrain I'm in, and you see how I'm positioned in the wind? I'm going to ride that 3rd wave back. My experience tells me that's the right wave to ride. And so my foresight tells me, get on that wave, Jim. And then with that foresight, what I do is I have insight into how to mount that wave, how to get on that wave. If I'm behind the wave, it's going to come over me, knock me off my surfboard, and I'm going to wind up eating sand. But if I time it right, I paddle in front of that wave, I get in front of the wave, I can actually use that wave to maximize the success of the ride. So insight tells me how to get in front of the wave. And then the next point, insightful leadership, gives me the ability to have an action to actually get in front of the wave and harness the power of the wave. To harness the power of the wave, I need to interact with that wave. Am I too far forward? Am I too far back? Do I have to step off my board to the left, to step off to the right? Do I have to shift? Do I have to do a little back step? Do I need to move to the right? How do I innovate to harness the power of that wave? And if I really capture that wave, what's going to happen? It's going to take me on the ride of my life, and I'm now going to be surfing to shore, and I'm going to be, whoa, this is an awesome ride. I won't use the analogy that my hair would be blowing, because that doesn't happen in reality. But if I had hair, it would be blowing, and the water would be splashing, and it's a tremendous ride. And then when you get ashore, what do? Well, since the waves are perpetual and the rides are continually happening, what you got to do is get back on the board and paddle out and go get your next foresight, pick out the wave, have insightfulness about it, and then take insightful leadership to innovate to ride that wave. And so it's a perpetual process. It never ends. That's the surfing analogy. If we look at the 3-step process of insightful leadership, the first step is step 0. What you need to have is you have to have the experience to have the foresight. Picking the wave is critical. If you don't pick the right disruption, that's going to become a tipping point, that's going to become a paradigm shift, you're not going to have a great ride. And so you need to have the experience to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with this disruption, tipping point, paradigm shift? Once I do that, I then do step 1, which step 1 is gaining insights. And gaining insight is understanding, how is that wave going to break? What's the impact of my foresight? I know that this is the right wave. Now, how do I think that's going to impact things going forward? And so I need to understand how the wave will break. I need to understand the implications of the foresight so that I can harness to my advantage my insight. And then step 2 is actually harnessing the power of the insight. That's getting in front of the wave, not letting it take me over, but having it move me, accelerate me to success. And that leads to step 3, which is creating success from harnessing the wave on step 3. And so that's when we innovate to make sure that we harness the power of the wave. So that's the process of insightful leadership. It's based upon foresight, having the experience, having insight, and then being able to harness the power of that wave. So what can you gain through inspirational leadership? First of all, you need to ask the question, what disruptions will crest into tipping points leading to paradigm shifts? And so you need to look at every disruption that comes along and say, is this something that's going to have a major impact on what I'm trying to accomplish? And what we do see is perpetual disruption begets perpetual opportunities. And the innovations then are the actions that require us that are required for us to take to have advantage of these endless opportunities. And so we need to make sure that that happens. Now, here's how this impacts our profession. You and I were trained to optimize, to look at the circumstances and to maximize or minimize some objective function. The problem is that objective function is going to vary over time. And so we need to not optimize for the current situation, but since the disruptions are occurring so frequently, we need to also prepare for the next disruption. Now, when Scott and I went to school, a major disruption took place once every 10 years, and you could optimize because you could have an optimum solution that allowed you to have really good runway for the next 10 years. But in today's world, where we're going through a decade's worth of disruption every 2 years, what we need to do is we need to prepare for that disruption while we're looking at this alternative. And therefore, what we need is not optimality, but instead optionality. And optionality replaces optimality. Okay, and so what we need to think is, what are the alternatives that we're going to be able to pursue if this happens, if this happens, if this happens? Okay, and so we need to look at a series of decisions that allow us to be positioned so that we can take advantage of the next wave. Or in fact, to use the power of this wave, we might need to shift, we might need to shift, we might need to shift because the wave is of such a magnitude. And so what we see is that optionality replaces optimality. Now, if we look at what's happened over the last, say, 32 months, it's useful for us to evaluate, looking back, what were the disruptions that led to what tipping points, and then what paradigm shifts came from this. This is insightful in that it allows us to understand the current trends and the implications they're going to have to us. Well, first of all, the mother of all disruptions was COVID-19. It began as a virus in China. They stopped exporting product, and so the factory of the world was closed. When the factory of the world was closed, it basically shut down lots of products, the availability in the world, and it also stopped a lot of manufacturing that were using those components. And so they exported nothing, and then they did export something. When they started to export again, they put it on ships, and it took time to get here. But what they also did is they exported the virus, and the virus went by air, not by ship. And so the virus arrived here before the parts did that we needed. So the first thing COVID-19 did, it had a major impact on supply. Our supply was done. People couldn't manufacture products because they didn't have the components. People couldn't sell products because they didn't have the manufactured products. And so supply was the problem up front. But then when they exported the virus, what we saw is that there was a problem and that people got locked down, and now we're locked down. And when you're locked down, you don't have the ability to go shopping like you used to and so forth. And so what happened is the demand changed. We were working from home, so we didn't buy the same clothes. You know, we bought casual clothes. We didn't buy business clothes. We all had to buy a new desk for home. We had to upgrade our desk at home. We upgraded our electronics and our technology at home because we were working from home. And so what happened? It was a major impact on first supply and then on demand. And then it had an impact because we were up, we were down, we were up, we were down. We're still uncertain as to when we're going to be able to ship or manufacture. And so what we find is a tremendous uncertainty with lead times. And so you have uncertainty of supply, uncertainty of demand, and uncertainty of lead times, which basically means the supply chain is broken. And so that's the second or third thing that hit us. The second thing that hit us was there was this thing of when we all stayed at home, what we did is we shopped from home. And so e-commerce grew like crazy. Okay, we had like 8% growth over the year. We had months of 40% growth of e-commerce. All of 2021 had a growth of 22%, huge growth of e-com. And so that huge growth of e-com resulted in us having more and more problems with our retail stores closing and bankruptcy occurring. But we also had problem is how are we going to get these e-commerce products delivered to the consumer in the place that they want it when they want it? And so that was a major impact that took place because of the explosion, the tipping point of e-commerce. And then the third disruption was this whole thing of global connectivity, where all of a sudden the supply chains were broken. You know, my wife and I have been married now for 54 years, but back 2 years ago, we were only married 52 years. And my wife came in this office, and there's a chair right on the other side of this computer. And she came over and sat down in that chair. And I thought, oh, wow, my wife never comes in here and sits down. She stops in and says hi from time to time. But why did she sit down? What did I do wrong? Did I forget to take the trash out? Did I forget to break down the Amazon boxes? What am I in trouble for? And then she smiled. And I thought, oh, that's cool. She smiled. And I said, hi, what's going on? She said, well, congratulations. I said, well, thank you. What are you congratulating me for? She said, you are now legitimate. And I thought, wow, what's that about? Mom and Dad never told me. I thought I was always legitimate. She said, no. She said, my girlfriends are calling me up and saying, supply chain, isn't that what Jim does? And she said, yeah. And she said, so my girlfriend's now, she said, for 52 years, I've tried to our friends, to our family, to our kids, to our grandkids, what it is we do, what you do, no one understood. She said, all of a sudden now, they know it's your fault that we can't buy toilet paper or tomato soup. And that's your fault because you made the supply chain not work. And so it's really interesting. And so what we saw is there's a need to address how do we live and how do we work? There's a need to address how we shop and how we get things delivered. And there's a need to reinvent the supply chain. These are three major shifts that have been required over the last 32 months. Let's look at the first one, how we work and how we live. Well, what happened to a lot of people, they stayed home and they found they kind of liked that. It was nice to be able to go to the kids' soccer game or the kids' Little League game. Mom liked to coach. Dad kind of liked to coach. It was a good thing to stay home more. And we found we weren't spending all our time driving to and from work. I found, oh my goodness, I've got all this time on my hands. I used to spend 25 hours a week in airports, going to airports, coming from airports, flying around, and it was not really productive. And so people are saying, you know, I kind of like my life at home, and I quit. There's others that say, I'm not going to quit, but I want to work from home. I don't want to go back to the office. And we've seen a number of these deadlines come and go. The most recent one was the Labor Day. The company said, well, you have to be back and you have to be in office 5 days a week. And they said, no, it doesn't work. And the employees say, no, I'm not going to do that. We enjoy this work-life balance, and we're going to continue to do that. There's a different culture that exists within the company because now you're not talking to people across the conference table. The culture now is one of being on Zoom and having discussions in that way. And so we find culture is a major issue here. And then the last point on the slide is a major, major, major leadership challenge. Leadership, you know, the old days, being 3 years ago, what we did is we had a strategy, we had a vision, we had a budget, we had a plan, and then we executed. And then we reported the results, and we went back into a new strategy, new vision, budget, and so forth. And that was an annual process we go through. But now what we find is the new approach to leadership. We have a strategy, and then we have to have an insight because the market has shifted. And then we execute, and then we need foresight, and then more insight. And then we need to execute, and then more foresight and more insight. And it is turning and turning and turning. And we go like 3 months with a plan, and then it's all new plan because it has to happen because these disruptions are occurring. And so those are opportunities, and we must respond. And so we have ongoing opportunities for ongoing shifts. And so what we find in the second outreach, with e-commerce explosion. First of all, there's this thing called distributed logistics. We used to put all the warehouses in the center of the country someplace, making them very large, using high levels of automation. But now all of a sudden, what we needed to do is we needed to have forward deployment of the inventory, and that forward deployment had to be closer to the customer. And so what we see is a change in the model. It's not building out in the middle of Kansas or out in the middle of Tennessee, a large distribution center. It's now building small fulfillment centers close to the high population density. It's also, you have a lot more workers. You have 3 to 4 times more workers to pick $1 million worth of stuff that's going to go e-com versus $1 million worth of stuff that's going to go to the store. And so we have more labor involved. We have different locations, and we have smaller fulfillment centers, and we have this issue of what inventory to put in what locations. We also found that we needed to have micro fulfillment centers, where micro fulfillment centers are mini version, oftentimes lights out type of fulfillment that allows us to feed a store for buy online, pick up in store, or alternatively to deliver straight to the consumer. What we're finding is because of the labor requirement and because of the shortage of labor, we're doing much more automation. The automation is not now justified by ROI as much as it's justified how are we going to get the orders out. And so there's this huge growth in e-commerce that's really changing the map with respect to how logistics is happening. And then with respect to final mile, there's huge changes that are occurring. The models that have been used to date are pretty much the models that we've used historically, but starting about 10 months from now, July of 2023, when the laws catch up with reality with respect to line of sight for final mile, and we start using more and more and more robots. Now, excuse me, more and more drones. We're going to see lots of drones being used. They're not going to be dropping things on the back porch. They're not going to be dropped out of parachutes. They're going to be going to docking stations. But what we're going to do is we're going to substantially reduce traffic out there on the roads, and we are going to go to a drone delivery, which is going to be a major change with respect to final mile. And so we can see, you know, the disruption, the tipping points, and now the paradigm shifts evolving. If we're looking at the overall supply chain, what we're seeing is a huge need for a digital supply network. It must be end to end, and it's total end to end. And we're not talking about the links of a chain. We're talking about the components, the nodes of a network. Okay. The problem we have with ERP and the whole enterprise thinking, my job is to make my company better. Well, okay, that's nice, but isn't the largest number on your P&L statement your cost of goods sold? And what is the cost of goods sold? Your cost of goods sold is a roll up of all your supplier. And cost of goods sold is the sum of what everyone else has spent. And since cost of goods sold is the biggest thing on the P&L, what we need to do is not worry so much about our cost, but we got to worry about what is the cost of our network. When we do that, it's not about having a great planning system and having a great execution system. It's not even about having a great planning and execution system. We got to eliminate that word "and." What we need is a new word called planning execution. It's one word. It's one thing. Planning execution is nonstop. It's end to end, and it's real time. And so we're going to eliminate latency and information flow. And so everyone in the network is going to have the same view of the same information at the same time. And so there's no mistaken what is occurring. And that's going to give us a single version of the truth. And that single version of truth for the network, we all understand where we are and the problems that exist. Now, given nonstop disruption, we're going to have nonstop challenges within that single version of the truth. In fact, it's going to be like me coming to Scott and say, Scott, I need your help. I got a couple of problems. Can you give me some help this afternoon? Scott said, yeah, I'd be happy to help, Jim. What you got? I say, well, here's the 16,000 problems I need to have solved by 5 o'clock this afternoon. Scott said 16,000. He said, Jim, I can help you with 3. Okay, I'm always happy to help you with 3, but I can't do 16,000 things. Well, guess what? in the real world supply chains, we have 16,000 problems that need to be solved in the next 5 hours. Well, how are we going to do this? This then brings back the technology solution that we're going to use artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's no way we can deal with an exception management type of rule. Now, what we're going to find is that maybe those 16,000 problems that Scott and I need to solve this afternoon, maybe 6 of them we need to personally deal with. But the other 15,994 of them, we're going to solve through artificial intelligence, and we're going to have autonomy. We're going to use autonomous supply chain planning execution to solve the problems. And that autonomous supply chain is going to give us resolution to these 16,000 problems and allow us to keep on trucking. And so that's going to provide us with a real-time network that does a great job of reducing costs and of synchronizing supply to demand, which of course is what the objective of the supply chain is. And so the resilient supply chain is drastically different than what we've seen in the past. Now, I thought it might be interesting to kind of apply this to a little bit of what's going on with respect to the war in the Ukraine. And I think what we need to have when we approach any problem is we have to have some foresight and we have to have some insight. And so the primary question from a foresight point of view, if we kind of deal with what are the disruptions of the Ukrainian war and what are the impacts going to be, the basic foresight question is who is going to win the war? And so when I look at that question, I answer I say, well, is Jim an expert on war? Is Jim an expert on, that part of the world? How can Jim put forth an opinion on this? Well, I'm not an expert on war. I've never been to the Ukraine. I have been to Russia. But I do have an ability to look at what makes people win, what makes companies win, makes universities win, what makes countries win. And I believe that the winners are determined by looking at their strength of 5 factors. Now, sometimes I look at these 5 factors and I say, well, Scott wins on these 3, but I win on these 2, but my 2 are more important than his 3. And so I don't know, it's not clear who's going to win. If Purdue's playing Ohio State in football, I'm a Purdue guy, Scott's an Ohio State guy. We can look at these factors and make a determination. And the bottom line is Ohio State's going to win 90% of the time. But disruptions do occur, and Purdue does win one every now and then. But the 5 factors we have to look at in anything, be it a football game, be it a university, be it a company, be it a country, the 5 things we need to look at is, first of all, the capital. The country or the university or the company that has the best financial and human capital that's a real plus to win. If you don't have the financial and human capital, you're not going to be successful. We need to look at the facilities you have. What are the buildings? What are the machines? What's the equipment that we have? And how can we bring that to bear in this battle that we're facing? The third topic, of course, is leadership. And in leadership, we got to say who's got the strategy, who's got the insight, who's got the foresight to make it happen. From a logistics point of view, we got to get the right stuff at the right place at the right time. And then lastly, which country, which company has the best technology? Which country has the best digital innovation for allowing them to deal with the circumstance that come to bear? Well, when I analyze the Ukrainian-Russian war from a capital, facilities, leadership, logistics, and technology perspective, and I look at what do we have with the Ukrainian people with the NATO allies, Ukraine wins on all 5 factors. Now, we could go in detail into these 5 factors, but I think if you do this analysis, this is not controversial. Ukraine people with the NATO allies will win from the point of view of capital, facilities, leadership, logistics, and technology. I don't care, political, whatever, this is factual. This is how it will be. And therefore, Ukraine will win the Ukrainian war. It's irrefutable. This will occur. And so now that's foresight. That's me picking out my wave. Now, I want to ride that wave. So what can I do? Well, what we need to do then is in particular areas, we need to take that foresight and turn it into insight that we can then capitalize on. And so the insight on how is this going to have an impact on what we're doing going forward. So the first question, the future of Russia, Russian allies, Eastern Europe, NATO, Taiwan, China, what is the impact of that? I don't have a clue. Okay, I don't belong in that competition. That's not where I surf. That's not my area of expertise. I would be way out of bounds if I tried to anticipate that. The second topic, the fertilizer impact and the global impact that has on the food crisis. What's the impact of sourcing of energy and materials, and what's the impact of inflation? I don't know. That's not my field. Okay, but what we need to do is go to people who have these two things as their fields, and we have to give them, given the foresight that the Ukrainians are going to win, what is your insight about what's going to happen? Okay, so well, number one, we got to stay in our backyard. Don't try to go off and predict what's going to happen to these things if we're not really experienced there. So I haven't worked in any of these areas in any of my career, but I have got 50 years working in supply chain, and I've got 50 years working in leadership. And so what are the impacts of the foresight that says that Ukraine is going to win the war? What is the insights that I can develop from that? Well, the first insight is sourcing is going to change drastically. And what we're going to do is we're going to be sourcing from friendly nations. We're going to be sourcing from closer to home. And there's going to be reshoring of essential products. And so semiconductors are going to be reshored. They're coming back. Rare earth is going to come back. Pharmaceutical ingredients are going to come back. Okay, outsourcing those around the world has been proven to be a major, major mistake. Now, many things, and in fact, most things are not going to be reshored. The problem with the term reshore, it says it's something that we used to shore that we're now bringing back and reshoring. It's what? The factories that we used to make that stuff in North Carolina, I live in North Carolina. It used to be apparel factories within every 20 miles. There was an apparel company. Guess what? All that stuff now is made in Southeast Asia in China. Why? Because it's high quality and lower price. And so that's not coming back. Those factories, in fact, have been turned into condominiums. They're not sitting there. The people that worked in those factories 40 years ago, they don't want to work in a factory anymore. Which one of us wants our kids to grow up and go work in a factory? That's not what we want. We want to have technology and sophisticated jobs. We don't want to have manual labor jobs. And so we're not going to be reshoring a lot of these basic components unless there's a way to bring to bear huge levels of automation, and therefore we eliminate the manual labor. But we don't have the manual labor to work in those factories, and there's no reason that we should. And so first thing is going to have a different sourcing taking place. That's going to change the supply chain. The second issue is going to be a huge growth in digitization, AI, and ML. If your company doesn't have an AL and MI plan, if we're not really focused on artificial intelligence and how that will help us grow our smart solutioning, we're going to be behind the competition and we're going to lose out. The third thing we're going to see is there's going to be an increased acceptance of a digital supply network and network collaboration. We're going to stop thinking about it's my company versus my competition. We're going to start thinking it's my supply network versus my competition's supply network. And the one that has the best network is the one that will win. We're going to see that it's going to be an increased utilization of automation, robotics, and drones because we don't have the labor, because there are good solutions there, and that's a good thing to bet on. And then lastly, there's going to be an increased amount of research, development, and entrepreneurship across industry. And so there's going to be a tremendous outpouring of new thinking on how to do this thing called supply chain. And so that gives me a framework to deal with what's going on with supply chain. The other area that I am qualified to look at is leadership. And what we're going to find in leadership is increased emphasis on culture, on meaningful work, on recognition and retention. The way that we've done leadership traditionally is going to change. We're going to be focused on employee growth and adult learning and mentoring and coaching. We're going to be applying technology to mentoring and coaching. We're developing a coach bot that can do coaching much better than humans can. We're going to be working in an environment of teamwork and collaboration. And if we're not communicating and working in a teamwork environment, we're going to change the players. We're going to be looking at a career personal balance where people are going to essentially work from home. Yes, we will come to work on occasion, but in general, the modus operandi is going to be work from home. We're more productive there. We're more happy there. That's when it's going to go. And so it's going to be a reality. The goal of going to work just to entertain your boss, to let the boss feel he can have his little meetings and you can entertain him. The only people that are going to put up with that are the marginal employee. The good employee is going to stay at home and be much more productive. The whole innovation, entrepreneurial technology thing is going to explode. We're going to have an increased awareness of the value of diversity and inclusiveness and understanding that different points of view build strength, and we need to focus on that. We need to look at wellness, mental health, and then we need to look at the development of insightful leadership. How do we train our people to have foresight and insight going forward? And that leads to the next slide, which kind of gives us an overall plan to approach to insightful leadership. If you're an entrepreneurial group, you're going to start in the southwest corner with the box that says innovation. Sometimes that innovation leads to entrepreneurship. Sometimes you say, this is too risky, and it's going to wind up in rest in peace. It's not going to make it. But it's going to make it to entrepreneurship some of the time. And those entrepreneurships, then we have to say, let's have some foresight with respect to what's happening, what's going on with the disruptions, the tipping points, and the paradigm shifts, and how is this going to really function? And so we then move to the foresight, and then we say, with this foresight, what's the insight about what's going to happen in the marketplace? Once we get to the insight in the marketplace, we then have some concepts, we have some innovation, we do trial and error and refinement, we do validation, we shift the paradigms, and we bring in professional management. And now, my goodness sakes, we are humming, we are an established firm, everything is great. Let's take the next 3 years off and just kind of sit back and enjoy the success, right? No. Why? Because there's more disruptions and tipping points coming. And so we'll become that established firm. We're number one. We're the best. If what you do is you become risk averse and you rest on your laurels, you're going back to resistance to change, and you're going back to the cemetery, rest in peace. But if you're willing to step up to the new disruptions, tipping points, and paradigm shifts, you get new foresight, which gives you new insight. You go around the circle. And the fact matters, we're going to be going around the circle faster and faster and faster. And it's going to be driven by the disruptions, the tipping points, and the paradigm shifts that beget the foresight, which beget the insight, which allows us to innovate and become good, better, and better. So the path forward to embrace insightful leadership, number one, you got to get off the couch. We've got too many companies that are sitting on the couch waiting for what's going to happen next. What we need to do is we need to get off the couch and realize it ain't 2019 anymore. And it never will be again. We're not going back to 2019. We're moving. It is 2022. It's going to be 2023 soon. Between now and the end of the year, there's going to be 3 or 4 major paradigm shifts that take place that we need to adjust to. And that's our job. That's what we need to do. Yesterday's solution is yesterday's donuts. It isn't any good. We need to focus on what the solutions are for today. What are the innovations that we need to make today and tomorrow? The disruptions are going to continue to come. The tipping points are going to continue to come. The paradigm shifts are going to continue to come. And so you need to update yourself. You need to be sharp. You need to be eager for the next challenge, for the next opportunity. And after all, isn't that what industrial and systems engineers are? Isn't that what we do? This is our age. This is our opportunity to really get off the couch and provide leadership to what's really happening. I bring back the surfing analogy. Kelly Slater happens to be the youngest champion of the Super Bowl of surfing. He also happens to be the oldest champion of the Super Bowl of surfing. So when he was like 19 years old, he won it. And then when he was in his 40s, he won it again. And they asked him, to what do you attribute your ability in the change in the technology, the change in the boards, the change in the rider? How can you keep surfing? And he says, what you got to do is you got to get rid of the fear. You got to get off the couch. You got to get on your board. You got to get in the water. And then what you have to do is you be able to study the disruptions, the tipping points in the paradigm, study them, understand them, reflect on them, think about what your experience tells you. And then what you got to do is you got to become a portion of that wave. And you got to let that paradigm shift accelerate you going forward. And that's going to allow you to make really good things happen. And as Scott knows, what that leads me to is my conclusion, which says, go grab your surfboard and go, go, go. Thanks so much, Scott, for having me.
Thank you, Jim. That was really outstanding. Lots and very positive feedback in the chat boxes as you went along. The last one just came in from Abby. Fantastic. So I think you hit a resonating note. I used to, when I was at Ohio State in graduate school, I had professors, and I would come home at night and B said, "How were your classes today?" And I said, "My head hurts." And, that was a good thing, right? And so you made my head hurt today, Jim, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So if you want to learn more about what Jim is doing at Tompkins Ventures, here are the ways to reach out to Jim. I got a copy of Jim's book because I wrote a reference for it, and I've read through it. I really love it. It's a great book. So in addition to reaching out to Jim, if you want to get a copy of the recording and the presentation, you can use either of these two links. And I think Will be chatting you the links right there, and so you can copy those links and get to those things today. The recording and presentation will probably take a day or two to load up at IISE. Jim, I think you'll probably be putting the recording somewhere on your website, and so they can go to your website and probably weave their way to your blogs and the recording. If you want to learn more about Jim, I showed you how to get to him on the last slide. If you want to learn more about the Poirier Group, our sponsor for today, also. There's a link to them. If you want to learn more about IISE, if you're not a member and you'd like to become a member for life, like Jim and I have been, this is how you get to IISE's homepage. We have a follow-on webinar coming up on the 27th. As we did, Jim, back in the spring of 2020, you sort of kicked it off for us, gave us a lot of food for thought, and then we sort of started to zoom in on, okay, how do we work with this? And so Jim Dobson and David Poirier will be sharing their points of view on how to achieve resilient organizational excellence in disruption, periods of disruption, like Jim talked about today. This is a link to the webinar is already set up for you. I think will post this link for you so you can log into this and register on the IISE Zoom link. We'd look forward to seeing you at that point in time. And James Swisher is the Director for Continuing Education and Training for IISE. Both he and I would love to get feedback from you. So there's a survey that'll be available to you as we close out the webinar. And so if you'll fill that out for us, we'd appreciate it. We've got a couple minutes left, Jim. There was a lot of chat as you were talking around the relationship between agility. You hear a lot about agile, right? There was a lot of talk around the relationship between agility and resilience. Talk a little bit about that in the context of that model you showed us at the end. Talk about the relationship, the role that agility and resilience plays in the way you think about managing disruptions.
Well, the term resilience is actually a mechanical engineering term, and the technical definition of it is your ability to bounce. Okay, and so if you look at the formula, if I hold a ball up here and I drop it and it goes down to the floor and bounces right up and hits my hand when it comes back, that has resilience of 1.0. If I drop the ball and it only comes up halfway, that's a resilience of 0.5. If I drop the ball and hits the floor and goes splat, it doesn't move, it just rests on the floor. That's resilience of 0. So your resilience is your ability to bounce. So that says when a disruption occurs, how able are you to take that in stride and keep on ticking, on continuing to ship, on continue to have product on the shelf? How well are you able to handle that? In your organization, someone quits. Do you have the people that have been trained to step up into that role? Do you have resilience? That's resilience, your ability to bounce. To the contrary, agility is different in that to be agile, you need to have two things. You need to be flexible and you need to be modular. Agility says that I can handle flexible. That says I can make the blue shirt and I can make the red shirt and I make the green shirt. Modular says I can make 100,000, I can make 200,000 per day. Okay, and so agility is the combination of flexibility and modularity. And so what we need to do is to have the flexibility to give the market what they want and the modularity to give them the volume of that product that they want. Okay, and so which is more important, resilience or agility? Yes, you have to have both. And when I'm talking about optionizing, I'm talking about optionizing on adaptability, on agility, on resilience, and having all of those things covered. And so there's multiple things that you need to do well to have an optionality mindset. Resilience and agility are two of the most important.
Great. Anything, Jim, anything else you would share in closing in terms of, giving people perspectives on what they can do next, for example, in terms of internalizing some of the things that you shared today? I guess that'd be the way I'd say it.
Well, I think what we need to do within our companies, within our universities, within our classroom, wherever we are, what we need to do is we need to sit down with the folks that have the experience, and we have to ask them the question, what are going to be the next tipping points that occur here? What are going to be the challenges that we're going to face? I mean, the changes to universities, the changes to supply chains, the changing to companies, the changing to the world is huge. And so the question is, what of those are the ones that we want to grab hold of? And we really need to sit down and pick out the right waves to ride. And then what we need to do is have a plan to harness that wave. So this isn't something that you wait for it to happen to you and then you try to respond. You need to get foresight and anticipate and get engaged. And so each company needs to have a group that's doing much more than strategic planning. This is insightful planning. This is how do we get ready for the future? And so this isn't another strategic master plan. This isn't a budget exercise. This is what the heck's going to happen. And if we don't do these three things, we're going to get eaten by our competition. And that's a call of urgency. So, I mean, I really am serious that this is important. There's going to be some great companies that aren't going to exist in 2 years because they don't do that. There's going to be some okay companies that really get with it and really understand the foresight of what's occurring and take the insight, and they're going to blow the charts off, and they're going to be the fastest growing Fortune 500 companies coming to bear in several years.
Yeah. So Jim, once again, thanks for taking time from a busy schedule to share with us today. And I'll leave you with just 2 words: boiler up.
Boiler up.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Scott.